Let's face it, you're probably here because, you want to get up to speed on something interesting fast.
Right. Cut through the noise, get the real insights without getting bogged down.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into kids wrestling. We found this really interesting guide. It's for volunteer coaches in U.S. kids wrestling.
Yeah. And even though it's aimed at coaches, it gives you this like behind the scenes look. It's not just about holds and throws.
No, not at all. It's surprisingly deep on, well, youth development through sports and the coach's role in that.
A really crucial role, it seems.
Definitely. So our mission today, we're going to mine this guide for the absolute must-knows, the core ideas, maybe some surprising stuff.
To give you a solid handle on kids wrestling and what's involved, a shortcut, basically.
You got it. So let's jump in. First up, the volunteer coach. Sounds simple, but the guide makes it clear it's a big deal.
Oh, yeah, right from the start. It frames it as this significant responsibility, these coaches. They're really shaping how kids see sports, competition, even themselves.
It's a world away from pro sports, isn't it?
Totally different. With kids, the guide stresses it has to be about fun, getting everyone involved, that sort of personal growth journey.
Not like the pros, where it's, wins, losses, entertainment value driving everything.
That distinction is key. The guide hammers this home. Kids' sports should be about learning, enjoyment. It's not for the coach's ego or, like, reliving their glory days.
Yeah, it warns that if the coach's ego takes over, it can actually poison the whole experience for a child.
Right. Ruins it.
And to make sure that doesn't happen, they lay out these 5 core principles, things like know thyself.
Interesting. What does that mean for a coach?
Well, I think it ties into understanding your own motivations, like you said, making sure it's genuinely about the kid's benefit.
Okay, makes sense. And the others?
Wrestling should be fun. That's number 2, in bold. Then emphasize participation, not winning.
That's a big one.
Huge. Then emphasize the long-lasting intrinsic values. And finally, treat the athlete as a whole person.
Wow, okay. That's a pretty strong framework. It's clearly about more than just wrestling skills.
Absolutely. It's character development alongside the physical stuff.
So what does that look like on the mat? What makes a good coach, according to this guide?
Well, things you might expect, but maybe take for granted. Leading by example, obviously. Being a friend who actually listens.
Listening, yeah, that's important.
Being generous with praise. Being fair, but also firm when needed. And staying calm and consistent. No wild mood swings.
Those sound like good qualities for, well, anyone working with kids, really.
They do. And the guide explicitly connects these coaching traits to building life skills in the wrestlers.
Like what specifically?
Things like self-discipline, self-confidence, building self-esteem, taking initiative, perseverance.
Wow, okay. Those are major.
Right. Desire, good physical condition, dedication, controlling your emotions, teamwork. Comradeship, they call it.
So wrestling in this view is this like powerful environment for building these fundamental life skills.
Exactly. Okay, so the coach is way more than just a technician. But their duties go even further into some maybe less obvious areas.
Yeah, this is where it gets pretty serious. The guide talks about legal and moral responsibilities, stuff volunteers might not always think about.
Like what?
Well, liability. Being potentially liable for negligence if something goes wrong, making sure kids have had physicals, they're cleared to wrestle.
Liability. Wow. That puts a heavy weight on volunteers.
It does. And
Wait.
fundamentally, safeguarding the kids, both physically and, importantly, psychologically.
Okay, let's break that down. Physical well-being first. What does the guide say coaches need to ensure?
The basics, really, but critical ones. Safe facilities. That means properly padded surfaces, mats taped down securely, no gaps.
Makes sense. What else?
Cleanliness. Keeping mats clean to prevent skin infections, which, can spread easily in wrestling.
Good point.
Proper warm-ups.
Yeah.
Absolutely essential for injury prevention. And then there's the weight issue.
Yes, weight classes. That can be tricky with growing kids.
Extremely. The guide is very firm. No weight cutting for pre-adolescents. Discourage it strongly. They need those nutrients to grow.
That seems like really sound advice.
Yeah.
And it tackles that old myth about water too, right?
Oh, yeah, thankfully. It completely debunks the idea that withholding water makes kids tougher or performs better.
So hydrate, hydrate, hydrate.
Typically, yes. Science shows it's crucial for performance and avoiding heat issues. No benefit to restriction, only harm.
Good. Myth busted. Okay, so that's physical safety. What about the psychological side? That seems just as important, maybe even harder to manage.
It is. And the guide's big emphasis here is on communication. Open, honest communication.
Between who?
Everyone, coaches, the wrestlers themselves, and the parents, they all need to be on the same page about the program's goal.
What kind of goals?
Things like, how important is winning, really? What level of competition are we aiming for? How are awards handled? How often are practices? How long are they? How long's the season? How many matches will they wrestle?
Wow. Getting all that clear up front could prevent a lot of misunderstandings and pressure, I imagine.
Exactly. It's about managing expectations, keeping the focus on development and enjoyment, not just, the scoreboard pressure cooker.
Creating that supportive atmosphere.
Okay.
But even with the best prep, injuries happen. How should coaches handle that?
Calmness. That's the first thing the guide stresses. The coach needs to stay calm. Panicking doesn't help anyone.
Easier said than done sometimes, but crucial.
Right. And then it gets practical. It lists essentials for a first aid kit. Bandages, tape, antiseptic, cold packs, eye wash, the works.
Sounds comprehensive.
It even mentions having the ambulance number handy, maybe coins for a payphone shows its age a bit there, but the principle holds, and knowing which parents might be doctors or nurses.
Smart. Being prepared. And what about the actual first aid? Does it give guidelines?
Yes, some key principles. Stay calm, like we said. Never play doctor. If in doubt, get professional help. Never move someone you suspect has a serious injury, especially neck or back. Use common sense, stop and think before you act.
And definitely don't let a kid wrestle on if they've had a significant injury.
Absolutely not. Competition stops.
Okay. Does the guide get into specific common injuries?
It does. It runs through a list. Stuff like getting something in the eye, blisters, small cuts, jammed fingers, nosebleeds, mat burns, or scrapes.
Usual suspects in contact sports.
Pretty much. And then more serious things. What to do if a wrestler is unconscious, suspected back injuries distinguishing severe versus slight pain, and neck injuries.
And for neck injuries, the absolute rule is
Don't move them if it seems severe. Wait for professionals. It also covers heat exhaustion, cooling them down immediately, giving fluids if they're conscious, and even basic steps for loss of airway, like CPR principles.
so it really tries to equip coaches for a range of scenarios, from minor stuff to potential emergencies.
Seems that way, giving them a baseline of knowledge and procedure.
Okay, good foundation on the coach's role and responsibilities. Let's shift gears to the actual wrestling, the nuts and bolts. The guide starts with takedowns. Seems logical.
Yeah, and it highlights just how vital takedowns are. It doesn't matter what style you're wrestling.
Gives that statistic, right? About scoring first.
Yeah, pretty striking. Something like 76% of wrestlers who score the first takedown go on to win the match.
Wow, 76%.
Yeah.
That's huge. Talk about a psychological edge.
Exactly. So getting that first takedown is a major goal.
So how do you do it? What makes a good takedown according to the guide?
It all starts with stance, a position of power and mobility. That means knees bent, back straight, head up, elbows in tight, feet about shoulder width apart, square.
A solid base.
Right. And it points out mistakes to avoid, like locking your knees or elbows straight, which kills your power, or letting your feet trail behind you, which messes up your balance and movement.
Makes sense. You need to be ready to explode from that stance. Then it mentions tie-ups.
Yeah, the initial grips you use to control your opponent before you shoot for the takedown.
What are some examples?
Things like controlling their wrist, grabbing the inside of their biceps, a head and bicep tie, getting an underhook, controlling the outside elbow. A few different ways to gain leverage and set up your shot.
Okay, so you establish a tie-up, then you go for the takedown itself. What techniques does it cover?
The classics, mainly.
Yeah.
The double leg takedown, the single leg. It breaks down the mechanics like lowering your level for the double, using that pump handle motion for the single.
Are there others mentioned?
Yeah, things like the arm drag, which uses their momentum against them, and the fireman's carry. It also stresses that moves should flow together. You need follow-up attacks if the first one gets blocked.
It's not just one move, it's a sequence, a
That's
system.
exactly. And defense is part of that system too, right? How do you stop someone from taking you down?
Good point. What does the guide say about defense on the feet?
Hip position is key. Keeping your hips back and low makes it harder for them to get to your legs. And it lists common counters too.
Counters like?
The hip block, using your hip to stop their penetration. The whizzer, which is an overhook to control their arm and upper body. The crossface, pushing their head away. Even things called the VA Nelson and the pancake, ways to shut down their attack.
Lots of options there. Okay, so we've covered fighting on the feet. What about once the action goes to the mat? Referee's position.
Right. The guide explains the standard starting position on the mat. Bottom wrestler on hands and knees, top wrestler positioned behind and to the side, with specific hand placements on the elbow and waist usually.
Got it. And if you're the wrestler on the bottom, what are the key things to do or not do?
Doze. Drive back into your opponent, try to keep your weight back, keep your head higher than your hips, elbows in tight.
And don'ts.
Don't flatten out, don't let them get your elbows away from your body, don't let your head drop below your hips. Basically maintain your base and fight pressure.
Makes sense. And how do you actually get out from bottom? Escapes and reversals.
Yeah, it covers the main ones. The stand-up is fundamental, just trying to get back to your feet. Then the sit back or sit out, creating space to turn in or escape. The hip roll, using leverage to potentially reverse them. And the switch, which is a more dynamic reversal move.
And for all of these, control is key.
Body control and applying constant back pressure against the top wrestler don't just flop around. It also briefly mentions how the top wrestler tries to counter these escapes.
It's a constant chess match, it sounds like. Okay, so say you are the top wrestler. You've taken them down, or they chose bottom. How do you keep them there? Breakdowns and riding.
Exactly. That's the goal once you're on top, maintain control. The guide talks about breakdowns, which are ways to flatten the bottom wrestler out, breaking their base.
How do you do that?
Applying heavy body pressure, usually targeting their shoulders and hips, using your weight effectively, controlling their arms or legs to stop them building back up to their base. Good riding is about constant, intelligent pressure.
And all that riding and control is working towards the ultimate goal, right? The pin.
The pin. Yep. The guide introduces several common pinning combinations.
Like the half Nelson, probably the most famous one.
That's there. Also, the cross-face cradle, an armbar combined with a reverse half Nelson, the three-quarter Nelson, something called a scarf hold. Different ways to trap their shoulders to the mat.
And presumably counters to these pins.
Briefly mentioned, yes. The main idea is fighting to regain your base, preventing them from securing the hold, and knowing the specific ways to counter the leverage of each pin.
Okay, that gives a really solid overview of the core techniques. But the guide mentions different styles of wrestling too, like freestyle.
It does. It presents freestyle as like an added attraction or option for youth programs.
How is it different from the scholastic style we've mostly been talking about?
The main thing is the emphasis on throws and back exposure. You get more points for exposing your opponent's back to the mat, even if it's not a pin. And interestingly, you don't get points just for escaping from the bottom position.
Ah, so the scoring really encourages those big dynamic moves, the throws.
Exactly. It changes the incentives and often leads to a faster-paced, higher-scoring match.
But do the basic takedowns and defenses still apply?
Oh, absolutely. The guide is clear that the fundamental stance, motion, basic takedowns, counters are still essential in freestyle.
Good to know. Does it mention any freestyle-specific moves?
Just briefly, it names a couple of attacks often used in freestyle to get that back exposure, like a far crotch lift or a near leg and step through technique.
Interesting how the core skills adapt. The guide also steps back a bit, talks about wrestling's history and appeal.
Yeah, it touches on wrestling being, maybe man's oldest sport. Really elemental.
It's just a primal contest.
Right. One-on-one strength, strategy, agility. And it points out how naturally kids take to it. That rough and tumble play, grappling, wrestling kind of formalizes that in a safe way.
Makes sense. It taps into something innate. And within youth wrestling, there isn't just one kind of competition, is there? The guide lists different types.
4 main types, yeah, designed for different goals. First, there are friendship meets.
Sounds nice and low-key.
Totally. The focus is 100% on participation. Kids wrestle multiple opponents, make friends from other clubs, try new things without any pressure. Just wrestle for fun and fundamentals.
Great way to start. What's next?
Ribbon tournaments. Still focused on maximizing wrestling time for everyone and de-emphasizing winning. Simple awards like ribbons for all participants to reinforce effort.
So still very positive, participation-focused. Then there are technique meets. That sounds different.
It is. Really interesting concept. Here, the focus isn't on winning the match, but on correctly executing specific wrestling moves.
Like judging in gymnastics or diving.
Exactly. Wrestlers are evaluated on how well they perform certain holds or maneuvers. You could even have multiple champions for different techniques. It's all about reinforcing proper skill execution.
That's a clever way to focus on learning the fundamentals well. And the last type, open tournaments.
Right. These are typically for the more experienced wrestlers, often qualifiers for bigger events. But even here, the guide stresses that coaches should still emphasize effort, personal satisfaction, and sportsmanship, not just the outcome.
The underlying philosophy seems consistent development first, especially for the younger kids. Okay, so to make all this happen, the practices, these different meets, you need structure,
Right.
organization.
Absolutely essential. The guide says you really need clubs or organized programs for youth wrestling to work well. And it lays out how to start one.
What are the steps?
First, find people who are actually interested. Then, hold an organizational meeting. Elect officers, set up committees.
Committees for what? Sounds like a lot of work.
It is, but necessary. Committees for things like finding coaches, getting facilities, fundraising, buying equipment, scheduling meets, handling travel, legal stuff like incorporation and insurance, arranging medical exams, promoting the program.
Wow, yeah. Covers everything.
Pretty much. It advises seeking help from established programs, too. Don't reinvent the wheel.
And a critical step, as we've discussed, is selecting the right coach.
Crucial. Making sure their philosophy aligns with the program's fun, fundamentals, participation first.
Right. How do these programs typically get funded?
Various ways. Membership fees, maybe?
Hmm.
Fundraising activities, car washes, bake sales, you name it. Seeking support from local businesses or community service groups. Financial accountability is stressed, too.
Good governance. What about equipment and facilities? Does it have to be super fancy?
Not necessarily. Basic gym uniform, maybe wrestling shoes and headgear, but those are often optional initially. The key thing is a safe, well-padded area.
Doesn't have to be a dedicated wrestling room.
Ideally, yes, but the guide acknowledges that schools might use cafeterias, stages, multi-purpose rooms. As long as there's enough padding, the mats are taped securely and it's kept clean. Mats themselves are expensive, it notes, so that's a big budget item. Safety is paramount.
Safety, safety, safety. Got it. Now, coaches deal with more than just the kids and the mats, parents, officials. How does the guide advise handling those relationships?
It emphasizes the coach's role in communication. It even gives tips on managing different wrestler personalities, the back talker, the attention getter, the bragger, the kid who always has an injury excuse, the potential quitter. Trying to understand the why behind the behavior.
Sounds like some basic psychology is needed.
A little bit, yeah. And huge emphasis on involving parents, keeping them informed and engaged positively.
Our officials, referees.
Treat them respectfully, professionally. Understand their job is tough. Focus on safety and fair play. Build a business-like relationship, not an adversarial one.
Good advice all around. Okay, let's dive back into the actual coaching on the mat. Teaching methods, you mentioned the whole method.
Yeah, that's the recommended approach. Show the whole move first, full speed.
Okay, see the goal.
Right. Then break it down into smaller steps. Drill each part. Then put it all back together, integrating the parts into the complete technique again.
Makes logical sense for learning physical skills and using assistant coaches.
Big thumbs up for that. Allows for small group instruction, which means more individual feedback, more hands-on help, way more effective, especially with kids.
More reps, more attention.
Exactly. The guide also stresses planning. Plan the whole season, plan each practice. Always keep those 5 guiding principles in mind when you're planning.
And understanding how kids learn, plateaus and stuff.
Yeah, acknowledges that progress isn't linear. Kids hit plateaus. Coaches need to be encouraging, patient during those times. Also, watch out for things that inhibit learning, like fatigue and boredom.
How do you counter those?
Rest, obviously, if it's fatigue. Motivation, varying the drills, keeping things fresh if it's boredom, and recognizing that kids learn differently.
Right, visual learners, kinesthetic learners.
Exactly. So present stuff in multiple ways. Let them visualize it, mental practice, do it, physical practice, see it, visual aids if possible, feel it, hands-on guidance.
Okay, what does a typical practice look like according to this guide?
There's a structure. Pre-practice. Coach reviews the plan. Warm-up. Essential. Gets them ready physically and mentally. Teaching. Introducing or refining skills, using that whole idea. Wrestling. Letting them actually wrestle, apply the skills in live, short bouts. And finally, pulling it together, wrap up discussion, maybe some final conditioning.
Seems like a solid flow. The warm-up needs to be thorough.
Absolutely. Start practice enthusiastically. Get them moving. Proper warm-ups and stretching are key for injury prevention. It gives examples like running the ring or group loosening exercises, emphasizes flexibility.
What about conditioning? Lifting weights?
For pre-adolescents, the focus is more on discipline, body control, and sport-specific strength rather than heavy lifting. It suggests connecting exercises to wrestling moves, maybe using isometric exercises.
Okay. And when teaching a new move?
Keep the atmosphere relaxed. Use partners to help each other learn. Address common mistakes proactively. Explain the rules related to the move.
And letting them wrestle is important.
Very. That's where they put it all together under pressure. Short bouts are recommended.
And the pulling it together part at the end.
Good for team unity, quick review, addressing questions, maybe a final bit of conditioning together, builds that team spirit. And then, crucially, hygiene reminder post-practice. Shower up.
Right, prevent those skin issues. Now, drills and games seem vital for keeping kids, especially younger ones, engaged.
Totally. The guide says drills should be enthusiastic, challenging, and mimic actual wrestling movements. Makes practice more fun and effective.
It describes some specific drills.
Yeah, like the back bridge from the feet, which is fundamental for defense and escapes. Others focus on hip counters, hand fighting, spinning, crawling under pressure, maintaining chest contact, all key wrestling actions.
Sounds like dynamic stuff, not just static repetition. What about games?
Games are great for changing the routine, building conditioning, and just letting kids enjoy controlled, rough play. It mentions the knot, where they tangle up and try to pin. One-legged chicken fights for balance. Even blindfold wrestling to develop feel and body awareness.
Huh. Blindfold wrestling sounds chaotic, but maybe useful. Okay, moving towards the end of the guide. Tournament organization. If a club wants to host one.
Yeah, it frames tournaments as fun learning opportunities. Then it gets into the practicalities.
Like what?
Registration and weigh-ins, how to handle entries, what info you need, how to mark the wrestlers, designing a good floor plan, where the head table goes, how the mats are laid out.
Logistics.
Lots of logistics. And personnel. Who do you need at each mat table? A timer, a scorer, a runner to take results to the head table. What equipment do they need?
Okay. And the head table.
Needs an announcer, a pairings chief, probably with assistants, to make the brackets and call matches, and an overall coordinator. They need clipboards, brackets, PA system, etc. And visible wall charts are important, so everyone knows what's happening.
Sounds like running a tournament is a major operation.
It definitely takes planning and enough volunteers. Clear organization is key.
Right. And finally, the guide touches on rules and regulations, acknowledges they vary.
Yes, it gives a quick comparison of some key rule differences between, say, international styles, U.S. kids rules, college scholastic, and high school scholastic.
Differences in what areas?
Things like what holds are legal, like the full Nelson is usually illegal in youth and scholastic, but maybe not elsewhere. How points are awarded for takedowns, escapes, reversals, near falls. Length of periods, rest times, how periods start, weight classes, injury time rules, uniform requirements.
Wow, lots of potential variations.
Yeah. Coaching rules during matches, stalling calls. It just gives a heads up that you need to know the specific rule set you're competing under. It also gives basic mat dimensions and points people to the official organizations for the full, detailed rules.
And reminds about the glossary in the guide itself.
Right, to help with all the wrestling jargon.
Okay. Well, that was a really comprehensive dive into this coaching guide. We covered a ton.
We did, and I think the big takeaway, which the guide really pushes, is that kids wrestling, done right, is about so much more than winning matches.
Yeah, it's this powerful tool for building character, teaching really valuable life lessons, and just fostering a love of being active.
And the coaches, the volunteers, they are absolutely central to making that happen. It's a huge responsibility, creating that positive, enriching environment.
It really is. Which brings us to maybe a final thought for everyone listening.
Yeah.
Considering everything we've talked about with this focus on participation over winning, on those intrinsic values, on the whole person, how could these ideas apply outside of kids wrestling?
Good question. Like in other youth activities, or even in how we mentor adults, maybe.
Right. Are there aspects of guidance and support, like really focusing on the process and the person's well-being, that we tend to overlook because we're too focused on just the outcome?
It makes you think, doesn't it? What's the real long-term impact of nurturing participation, intrinsic motivation, and just treating people as whole individuals first?
Right.
Something to definitely mull over.